All right. My name's Steele Graybar. I'm the 4-H educator in Elkhart County, and I'm just presenting this as a supplement for folks that were not able to attend the leader training on April 18th, 2023. This is the program that I'm going to be teaching that night. Well, it's tonight for me. But it's going to be on conflict resolution. And I'm going to kind of keep this short and sweet. Some of the activities don't make sense to do via Zoom, but I can explain them to you at least. But we'll really kind of focus on the training portion, the content of dealing with conflict resolution. And it's going to be a pretty brief training too. So this is by no means all encompassing. This is just trying to kind of introduce some concepts to conflict resolution and could be applicable to many audiences outside of 4-H, right? This is just for my adult volunteers and leaders, but 4-Hers can use this as well. Other educators could use this. Really, anybody could use this information. I was fortunate enough to go to a countywide training a couple weeks ago at our county admin building with our support staff in this office. And the presenter there, John Barrett, did a very good job. Let's see if you can see that. This is the book he gave us, the book that we went through. I've taken pieces of that training. I mean, that was a 2-hour training. So I've just taken pieces of it that I wanted to cover with volunteers, and I'm going to share it here via Zoom, and then later tonight in person. So I guess the first thing that comes up, the question that I would ask audiences is, is conflict good or bad? I think that's a debatable question, right? I think my first instinct was that, yeah, I don't want to deal with conflict. And I think that definitely lends itself to kind of how I deal with conflict, which is mostly through avoidance. I realize that there are some people that deal with it that way too, but there's also other ways that folks will deal with conflict in a more head-on manner, and with more aggression than that. There's just different types of people and different types of ways to deal with conflict. And I'm not going to say one way is better than the other, but I'm going to try to give you some context as to why those two ways of thinking can still work together. Okay. So is conflict good or bad? It's normal. It's neutral, right? It's going to happen. It's inevitable. It's necessary. That's conflict. How you deal with conflict is where things can go good or bad. So that's what I want you to keep in mind as I kind of go through this. How you deal with conflict is ultimately what decides whether conflict is good or bad. I'm sure, can think of situations where you've had conflict, you tried to deal with it, it didn't go well, and you've moved past it in your own life, but there's maybe some people out there that you don't want to see again, or maybe there's some situations that bring back memories that you don't want to deal with. So that's unhealthy ways of dealing with conflict. But on the flip side, there are examples of conflict, I'm sure too, where you've overcome it, you've dealt with it, and maybe it grew into a friendship, or it grew into you built more confidence in yourself and your abilities. So there's obviously different outcomes that we're dealing with too. So that's just all something to keep in mind. This slide here, not many words on it. It's mostly because I use it for the games that I'm going to play in the training. The one on the right, the color wheel, we'll start with that first. I will ask the room what color reminds them of conflict the most, and then they'll have to share why. And I thought red would be the most popular. It was the color I picked, but you may have a different color in mind, and other people will have a different color in mind. There are different colors on this wheel that strike a nerve with some people versus others. Red for me was just sort of like, again, it goes back to how I deal with conflict. I look at red and I think stop sign. It's like, nope, time to stop. Just going to wait right here. Let everybody else go through the intersection. But a different color may have a different meaning for you, and it might definitely show how you typically deal with conflict. So that's an interesting activity to do. And then the one on the left, you have the green means go, red means stop. Again, kind of talking about red, but this is a different activity. Tammy Gerber, who's a volunteer in our county, she was able to witness this game during a junior leader meeting. She thought it was outstanding and great. And we're going to play it tonight, Tammy. So if you're there and if you're listening, hope you enjoy it as well. Again, but the way this works is I will give, everybody's going to have to stand up, and they start with two commands. I'm going to say, when I say walk, walk, and when I say stop, stop. And we'll do that for about a minute. And then I'm going to add two more commands. And I'm going to say, try to remember what they were. Okay, yeah. When I say hop, hop, and when I say twist, twist, okay? So now I have 4 total commands. We'll do that for a minute. Now, this is where it gets interesting. So I'm going to add 2 more commands. When I say clap, they'll have to clap. And when I say name, they have to say their name. And you're saying, okay, well, that's 6 commands. I think I can do that. Well, also, now when I say walk, I actually need you to stop. And when I say stop, I actually need you to walk. And we do that for a minute. And we're going to lose some folks there. There's going to be some people that aren't able to keep up with all of that stuff. And then we go one more time. And not only is walk mean stop and stop mean walk, but now hop means twist and twist means hop. And then we do that for a minute. And then usually people, there's a couple of different things that happen. People will try to keep up and be laser focused on what they're doing, but maybe they'll make a mistake and they'll slip up and they'll get frustrated. And then they'll be mad at me about it because these are ridiculous commands, right? Or in my case, what happened to me is I fell behind and I didn't know how to get back in. I didn't know how to catch back up, right? And then I shut down. These are all scenarios that can happen in a workplace, in a organization, any roles really, in a family unit. If you're receiving so much information in so many different directions, but it becomes overwhelming, or the commands themselves seem contradictory, it's going to create conflict. And that's really all we're trying to do in this activity. Is talk about that and kind of work that into the rest of the presentation. So that brings me to the third slide here, which is the conflict continuum. So this is generally what I spend the most time on. There are basically 2 ends of the spectrum when it comes to dealing with conflict. You have people that are, when conflict happens, they are aggressive and they are attacking and they lash out, they're loud, and it can be violent in some cases. And then you have on the other side, the artificial harmony people who are, basically in their own world pretending that nothing's wrong and aren't going to say anything about it because they don't want to start anything. They're trying to avoid it all. But ultimately, I think the thing that I try to get across during this part of the program is neither one of those is better than the other, right? I think, again, I definitely think I'm more artificial harmony, probably like a 5 out of 10 artificial harmony. And I've always thought that I was, it's those aggressive attacking people that are the problem, right? I'm dealing with this in a healthy way over here. I'm moving forward, progress. We're going to keep going forward. We're not going to pretend that anything's wrong. Well, that can be as problematic as dealing with it in the moment and ripping off the Band-Aid, as my colleague says here, Robert Kelly. He's much more of an aggressive attacking person, and we work together. So, and we work together for years, and it's worked out because we can hit that middle, that bullseye that you see there. When we deal with conflict, more often than not, it's healthy conflict. So how do we get there? How do we get to healthy conflict? I think number one, it's acknowledging that, again, like I said, that if you are an aggressive attacking or artificial harmony person, that's not the right way to deal with it, right? You want to try to understand the other side. You may have 2 aggressive attacking people that are in conflict. You may have 2 artificial harmony people that are in conflict. We don't want them to stay in conflict. We want them to come back together. And what ultimately happens in every situation, anytime there's conflict, okay, this is maybe the most important thing that I'm going to say when it comes to conflict resolution, is that it doesn't matter who you are. When something happens, you both experience something. You and the other party experience something that creates that conflict. It's a catalyst, right? It's can be as simple as I forgot to go pick up something at the store the other day because I was busy doing something else. Well, that person that asked you to do it really depended on you to do that, and you didn't. So, boom, conflict, right? That's how it happens. It just happens suddenly. Again, like I mentioned before, it's normal. It's going to happen. It's inevitable. How you deal with it is the most important thing. So, okay, we both experienced something. Something happened. Now, depending on who you are, you're going to start building a narrative in your head. Everybody does this. This isn't just you, okay? Every person builds a narrative in their head, basically being a lawyer for themselves as to why they're right and the other person's wrong. And this situation, whatever happened, this is why I'm right and they're wrong. And they're building their case and they're writing a book, they're writing a book out, and they can't wait to sit down and have a conversation with you because this is why, X, Y, and Z. I've outlined it all here. I rest my case and how they deal with conflict. And that's not a healthy way to deal with conflict at all. But this is the key piece, is that if you don't deal with conflict, if you don't eventually meet and have and talk through it, that story is going to continue to cascade and snowball. And we all know situations where we argue with somebody and they're upset about something, and it turns out they're actually upset about something that happened way before that, or a couple things that happened, small things that happened that built up to this. That narrative has just been going on that whole time. They've been building that story, and this was just the latest incident or the latest spark to kind of set that off. Okay. So the way we have to try to deal with that is, I think, you really give yourself, if you're listening to this and you're dealing with conflict or about to deal with conflict, the next time you deal with conflict, give yourself 24 hours to think about it, acknowledge that you are building that narrative in your head, and acknowledge that they are too, and realize that it's important that you sit down and have a conversation within that, after about 24 hours, and deal with it then. Because if you don't, it's going to become harder to deal with it. I think the narrative is just going to get larger, and the resentment, the bitterness is just going to get worse. And it's going to be harder to meet for that healthy conflict in the middle. And when we start to build that bitterness and resentment, those are feelings, right? We feel a certain way now. Oh, they didn't go pick up the groceries because they don't care about having food in the fridge, or doing their part of the job here. They're not carrying the weight that they should be carrying. I do everything around here, they do nothing. Something like that, right? That's bitterness and resentment talking. That's unhealthy. And it's normal. I think we all, a lot of people feel that way. None of us are angels, right? We all kind of have the same feelings. We may not talk about it, but we do. The other person's doing the same thing. I think if you realize how that's common ground for both of you, and share that with the other person, that you understand how they're processing it, because you're probably processing it the same way, that helps in this too. But you got to understand those feelings are happening. And then one way or another, when we start to have feelings about something, we act on those feelings. I'm encouraging you to have a conversation with that person after about 24 hours. That's acting on those feelings, I think, in a positive way, assuming they're ready to have a conversation with you. But if we don't deal with it, that energy is going to go somewhere, and it could be destructive, right? It could be, we can act on those feelings in a negative way. Or we're not talking, maybe we're acting out something instead. So I just want you to think about that. So in sort of sum, just understand that when something happens, we both tell stories in our own heads about what happened and why we're right and they're wrong. It becomes us versus them. This is going to create feelings for us. We're going to get angry about it, upset, hurt. And the longer we let that build up, the harder it is to have that conversation with somebody to try to fix it and meet and resolve it. So how do we resolve it then? What does that conversation look like? What does healthy conflict look like? Well, once we've done those other things and we meet and we finally are sitting down, you're going to know really quickly, very quickly, if both sides are ready, right? If both parties are ready to have this conversation, because if they're not, if they're an artificial harmony person, most likely, they're going to be quiet. They're not going to talk. They're not going to reciprocate any of the conversation. They don't want to be there. They're probably either being forced to be there or feel like they're being forced to be there, or they're not listening, or they're trying to avoid it. They are still upset and hurt by it, and they are not ready to have a conversation. If that happens, we'll meet another time. It's okay. This wasn't the right time. Let's go ahead and think about meeting again sometime soon. Even if it's been 24 hours. No, it wasn't long enough for that person. So let's wait a little bit longer. Or the other side, you'll know if it's not the right time is, if it's an aggressive attacking person, most likely, they're going to be loud. They're going to be mad. They're going to be acting out. Yelling could be occurring. That's a telltale sign of somebody who's dealing with it in an aggressive attacking way. And you don't want to be in that conversation either. So it's a good time to say, okay, we weren't ready for this either, and step away and wait and let it cool off a bit more. You'll know you're having healthy conflict and both ready to have that conversation when both parties feel safe and feel like, okay, the other side's listening. I think they maybe understand a bit more about what's going on. Let's talk this through and figure things out. Okay, that's really I think the best way to deal with it in healthy conflict is recognize those scenarios where if somebody's being silent or they're being violent, not the right time to have that conversation. If it's been 24 hours, try to have it, but if they're not ready, don't. Eventually you're going to be ready to have that conversation, I think, and talk it out. It's important that we all talk it out, don't act it out, because like I said, energy goes somewhere. When we have that conversation, maybe before you have that conversation, after 24 hours, try to put yourself in the other person's shoes, right? We want to try to understand their place in all of this. We don't want to try to go in there and put them in their place. I hope you understand the difference, right? I'm not bringing all of my primary documents to court to try to prove why I'm right and you're wrong. That's not healthy conflict. I'm trying to understand why you did what you did. And there's a good chance there's a logical reason for that. I think people are good, generally good, right? So help me understand why you did what you did. And I'll help you understand why I did what I did. And hopefully, neither one of us acted in malice, right? We were both trying to do the best we could because we're good people and work from there. Okay. And then the last thing I would say is, people can sit down and have conversations for hours and not accomplish anything. I think we all can agree with that. We've probably seen it. When we're trying to resolve conflict, though, we want to try to have actionable steps in place by the end of that conversation. Okay, so this happened. We had this thing. We finally got to healthy conflict. We had a conversation about it. How do we make sure that doesn't happen again? What can we do to be proactive to fix this, right? I think that's an important question to ask at the end. Get clarity, get some action steps as to, okay, well, I'm going to set a time during the week to go get groceries, and that's the time I go get groceries. And if I guarantee I'll go get them at that time, but that's the only time that week that I have set aside for that. So let's make sure that we have everything we need and we have a list prepared, something like that, right? So then we're on the same page. My last slide. These are just sort of some tools to think about when you're having that healthy conflict conversation, okay? Done, did, do. When you're sitting down and you're talking to somebody, finally they're ready to talk, you're ready to talk. This is something you can remind yourself is, done, did, do. This is a tool that you can use. The first thing you're going to ask yourself is what was done, and you're going to let both sides share what they think was done. We want them to be specific. We want them to be factual. Okay, like this is step by step. Show the math, as I say. Show the math. Like when you were in school and you had to show the work on your math. We're doing that with our conversation here. We're trying to say, okay, well, we talked at this time, and I thought that this was what was going to be happening, etc. Be specific, be factual. Then you got to talk about sort of what it did. What we talked about, what was done, what it did. How did I feel about it? Now you can be honest. You can say, okay, well, this is where I thought you didn't care about me or this family or whatever. I'm saying that's just an example. You lay it all on the table. Be honest. Let them know all the feelings that you had, and don't assume that they know anything about that. They're not going to know if you don't tell them. It's important to disclose that stuff during this part of the conversation. And then the last piece is when I talk about action steps, or how do we get some clarity and move forward. This is where you need to be clear and have those measurable steps in place as to, okay, this is how we're going to know that we've improved in this area, because we're going to start doing this now instead. If it's like a scenario like I'll share with mine, like I have not been great at documenting the work that I do on a monthly basis. So how can I fix that? Well, what if I send myself a reminder daily? It sounds like a lot, but it's actually helpful for me. Reminder daily to document what I did. Sounds simple, sounds like it could be tedious a little bit, but it's helpful because it helps me remember everything that I did, and it helps me at the end of the month write down all of those things that I did. That's a clear, measurable step that I've taken to try to improve my documentation as a whole, right? So finding ways to kind of build in routines, or a way to definitely see progress and growth in what you're working on and trying to fix. That's what we're trying to do. And then the conflict compass is the last tool. So if you're not in the midst of conflict right now with somebody, or dealing with it currently, what you can do to be proactive is create a conflict compass, is what we call this. So imagine a compass, and you're trying to get yourself out of the woods. You're lost in the woods, right? Anytime conflict occurs, it's kind of like being lost in the woods. You want to try to create like a plan of, hey, this is how we're going to deal with conflict when it happens, because it is inevitable, and be able to use that when conflict arises in your organization, in your club, wherever. But you want to create it together. This isn't just, oh, Steele's creating this and now everybody has to use it. No, everybody needs to be involved. And then when conflict happens, we can go back to that compass and say, hey, remember when we sat down and worked on this and we thought, okay, when we have conflict, what are we going to do? This is what we're going to do. And I mean, it's full disclosure. I know I mentioned Robert is a colleague of mine in this office, and we've hit conflict before multiple times. It's pretty clear that what works for us is, the rip the Band-Aid off approach. So it's not saying that that's the best way, but it works for us. Is we generally, about 24 hours, honestly, we kind of let that sit, and that's what we were doing before I even knew any of this stuff. And then we go right into it, and hey, this is done, did, do. And then we move on, and it's worked for us for a number of years. But the other piece there is under conflict compass. That's our compass, by the way, that rip off the Band-Aid. When we say that, that's sort of okay, let's rip off the Band-Aid, Robert, let's do this. We both know what that means, and we know that we're about to just work our way through this like the straightest way possible, but that's what works for us. There's no wishy-washy way to get around it. We just go straight to the middle and have that healthy conflict. But the last thing I'll say is, if you have regular check-ins with people that you've had conflict with in the past, and you kind of remember, hey, don't forget, we have this conflict compass, that helps too. Just more communication in general is helpful. So that's really the presentation that I have that I'm going over tonight in a few hours. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me at sgraybar. That's SGREYBAR @purdue.edu. And I hope this was helpful, and I want to thank you for watching. See you later.